Call the meeting of County Council to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, everybody. I apologize for the late start. Next is optional prayer invocation, Mrs. Lull.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let us pray. Lord, help us not to lose vitality, rather than gain it as time passes. Help us not to give greater attention to what we were, rather than what we are becoming. It is easier to look back into the past and smile on yesterday's accomplishments than it is to look ahead into the future and think about tomorrow's possibilities. We need to continue to change with the time and the seasons, use new ideas, and progress forward. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Roll call, please, Mr. Smith.
Mr. Anderson,
Here.
Mrs. Fatika,
Here.
Mr. Horton,
Here.
Mr. Leone,
Here.
Mrs. Law,
Here.
Mr. Rastetter,
Here.
Dr. Faust.
Here. Next is a hearing of the public. All those that called in ahead of time will have 5 minutes. Thereafter, anybody will have 3. The only one to call in ahead of time is Mr. Barnes. Welcome, Randy.
I do want to say it is somewhat difficult to hear you guys.
Okay.
Good evening, Dr. Faust, Chairman, guests. My name is Randy Barnes. I reside in Dr. Faust's district, and I'm here tonight to talk a little bit about a new website, and you may want to write this down, regionalcollegepa.org. You'll find that's the Northern PA Regional College, and right now they're offering associate degrees on that site. You can go see what associate degrees you can get. And I think what's also interesting about the regional college is they're offering development classes, and we've heard a lot of our manufacturers in the area need machinists and CNC type machinists and people to work in manufacturing. And right now they're offering development classes, which aren't degreed classes, but they're in geometric tolerancing and dimensioning, blueprint reading, and industrial mathematics. So this Northwest Pennsylvania Regional College is trying to address the needs of that we have up in Erie County. But what's interesting is I wonder if back in 2014 that the county executive and Mr. Batchelor and several other people thought, well, we're going to ask for this. We'll never get it, and we can use the excuse that we didn't get it, we can need a community college. Well, guess what happened? They were so convincing that we got this college. But what's sending me a strange message is, now that we got what we wanted, we did ask for this, right? The county executive did write a letter to the state senator and the person in charge of the Erie Community Foundation and Mr. Bishop from Corey Education Council, and several people said, this is what we want. So what have we done? We've got what we want, so what have we shown the state? What have we shown the Department of Education? We said, hey, we changed our mind. We knew what we wanted then, and we got what we wanted, but we changed our mind. We don't want that now. Forget that now. I remember when we had the hearing down at the library, Mr. Bishop from Corey said, well, we'll just get out of the regional college. we'll just get out. You can't do that. It's legislated. It's funded. You know more about how this government things work than I do. But once you've asked for something, you've got something, take it and work with it. But I don't see that happening with the administration. I don't see it happening with council. I don't see it happening much in the community at all. It's like we want to ignore this. It'll go away. So we can have our community college, and, in 10 years, we're going to need a $30 million campus. Oh, was it $37 million, I guess. Well, maybe in 10 years, we're thinking what we want today, but we're not thinking what we'll need in 10 years. Education is going to be much different in 10 years. Sure, we're going to still have these large institutions that have soccer teams and, volleyball teams and basketball teams and football teams and student unions and student government. We have all those things. We're going to always have those. But we're going to have a group of people that just need some education. They don't need to try out for the lacrosse team to get a degree in business. So what we're thinking of for 10 years from now is you may want to erase that from your mind, because things are going to be a lot different 10 years from now in education, how we deliver education, how we receive education from college, university level and above, right down to grade school, kindergarten, and preschool. Things are going to change, but we're thinking about what we want right now. Well, I'm not sure what we want right now, because we wanted a regional college. Everybody in this room that was elected wanted it. No one stood up and said, we don't want that. And we got it. So what are we doing with it? I'll tell you what we're doing with it. We're ignoring it because for some reason, there's a group of people in this town that said, you know what? We don't want that. We're not going to try it. We're not going to make it work. We want to see it fail. Because we got our own agenda. We've already spent hundreds of thousands, maybe $500,000 on our own agenda. Take the Northwest Pennsylvania Regional College and stick it where the sun doesn't shine, is what I'm getting from this administration and this council and a lot of people that have influence in this town. I think it's a terrible thing to send the message, but when we get what we want, we just change our mind. Or we get what we want, we're like little children. We get what we want, and then we change our mind. We don't want that. We want something else. It's easy to plan, but once you get what you want, you got to execute. We're great at planning. Let's plan a community college. Let's plan this, let's plan that, let's plan. But what you got right now is a Northwest Pennsylvania Regional College.
Randy, thank you. Your time has expired.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else from the public wish to be heard tonight? Seeing none, moving on to approval of the minutes of the previous May 1st meeting. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So move.
Moved by Mr. Horton,
Second.
seconded by Mrs. Fatika. Is there any comments or corrections to those minutes? Mr. Smith, roll call, please.
On the minutes, Mr. Anderson,
Mr. Anderson, could you hear us?
we'll come back to him, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Lahl,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson, can you hear us?
Hold on, he's texting me right now. Well, it's about a different issue.
Dr.
Hold on
Faust?
for a minute.
I can barely hear you guys.
Got him.
Call for his vote.
Mr. Anderson, on the minutes, how do you
Yes.
vote? Thank you. Dr. Faust?
Yes. Reports of county officials, report of the county executive and/or her designee. Thank you, Mr. Sparver. Finance Committee, Mrs. Fatika.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Finance Committee met on Thursday, May 10th, and we agreed to put on the agenda under old business item A, under new business items with ordinances listed as A, B, and C, and in addition, items E, or double E through double M. That concludes my report, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Fatika. Personnel Committee, Mr. Horton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. The Personnel Committee met on Thursday, May 10th, 2018, and we agreed to add to the agenda under new business items E through double D. That concludes my report, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Horton. Any questions either for Mrs. Fatika or Mr. Horton, for that matter? Okay, reports of other members of council. There was none expressed in caucus. Has anybody changed their mind? Okay, moving on to old business. We'll have a second reading now of ordinance number 36. In title only, please, Mr. Smith.
A second reading of ordinance number 36, 2018, amending the county purchasing code contained in Article 3, Section 1G1 of the Administrative Code of Erie County.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Fatika and seconded by Mrs. Lull. Is there any discussion? Mr. Smith, roll call, please.
I believe we have to amend this, Mr.
Oh,
Chairman.
I'm sorry, yes. Could we have a
I
motion?
move to amend ordinance number 36 to reflect the amended language that, is this it?
Yes, sir, provided by our
Provided by our solicitor.
Second that motion?
Moved to amend by Mr. Horton and seconded by Mrs. Fatika. Is there any discussion regarding the amendment? Thank you, by the way. On the amendment, roll call, please, Mr. Smith.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes. Any further discussion on ordinance number 36 as amended? Mr. Smith, roll call on ordinance number 36 as amended.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes. Before we get into new business, is there a motion to amend tonight's agenda?
I move that we amend tonight's agenda under new business to move ordinance number 43 to a second. Also, item D to a second, as well as item E to a second.
So, second?
Did you want to make your resolution tabled as part of that motion as well?
Yes, I do, and also to table item double H.
Moved by Mr. Horton and seconded by Mrs. Fatika. Mr. Smith, roll call, please.
On the motion, Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes. Okay, with tonight's agenda amended, I wanted to, Mr. Talarico, just so to give people time to consider it before we get to it, had a suggestion regarding Mr. Hayes' appointment coming out of caucus. Did you want to discuss that now, Mr. Talarico, just so everybody can at least think about it?
Do you mind doing it at the microphone, Mr. Talarico?
No, we need you to go up there, because Carl and Fiore can't hear you.
Should I say where I reside?
Sure.
Carl? Is this on? Okay. Yeah, with respect to, there were a couple of points that I wanted to make with respect to the appointment of this gentleman.
I can't really hear Tom. I'm sorry.
Why don't you
How
come
about
up here?
Yeah.
Carl, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Just a couple comments with respect to the appointment of this gentleman, his name is Greg, to the Airport Authority. And it's not just him or the Airport Authority, but just council's appointments to authorities generally. As we know, they usually come, they're recommended, and the council approves them, pretty much rubber stamps them. And that's because we tend to think and believe that the appointment is made by the particular member, and the rest of council is going to respect that member's request. And a lot of that is true, and that should be the way it is, except you don't want to blindly do that or automatically do that if there really is a concern sometimes about a particular appointment. I'm not in a position to give an appointment right now as to whether this gentleman would have a conflict of interest were he to serve on the authority, because I don't know the nature and extent of his business and what impact it has, or what impact the authority business has on his business. But that is a very important question to answer, and council should not take it lightly, nor should they think that just because the appointment was made by one member, that it should automatically be
council should automatically adhere to that. That's not the way it should be. Council has a responsibility to look at each appointment and decide in certain situations whether an appointment may not be in the best interest of that authority. So with regard to this gentleman's appointment, I think that council, since it's become an issue, council should think a little bit about this guy's business and his involvement, and whether it would impact, or whether the authority's business would impact on his business, and therefore whether he would have to serve or not serve.
And your recommendation was me is to potentially table it as a result so we could gather that information.
Yes, I mean, I'm not in a position to say whether he has. On the surface of it, it would seem that, to me, at the very least, that it should be looked into.
Okay, with that, we can have the discussion on that particular point when we get to his appointment. I just wanted to give all of you at least time to be able to consider that. So let's move on with the agenda as presented tonight. So a second reading of ordinance number 43, please, in title only.
A second reading of ordinance number 43 of 2018, third 2018 Planning Fund Budget, supplemental appropriation of $901,000, and new line items for Act 89 registration fee.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Lawl and seconded by Mrs. Fatika. Is there any discussion? Roll call, please, Mr. Smith.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Dr. Faust.
Yes. Okay, a first reading of ordinance number 44, please, in title only.
A first reading of ordinance number 44, 2018, 2018 Gaming Fund Budget, revised revenue and expenditures of $1 million, removal of restriction and creation of line items for Erie County Land Bank.
First reading of ordinance number 45, please, in title only.
A first reading of ordinance number 45, 2018, amending ordinance 59 of 2004, Erie County Human Relations Commission to add additional protected classes.
So moved.
Oh, no, that was,
Oh, it's first reading.
sorry.
Sorry.
Okay, that was 45. I apologize, excuse me. Okay, next is a second reading of ordinance number 46, please, in title only.
A second reading of ordinance number 46, 2018, 2018 Library Fund Budget, revised expenditures for custodial expenditures of $13,638 for additional library security.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Horton and seconded by Mrs. Fatika. Is there any further discussion on ordinance 46? Mr. Smith, roll call, please.
On ordinance 46, Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Dr. Faust.
Yes. Okay, a second reading of ordinance number 47, please, in title only.
A second reading of ordinance number 47, 2018, 18th 2018 General Fund Budget, supplemental appropriation of $9,098 for creation of court administration senior secretary.
So moved.
Moved by
Second.
Mr. Horton and seconded by Mrs. Fatika. Any further discussion regarding ordinance number 47? Mr. Smith, roll call, please.
On ordinance 47, Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Leon,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Dr. Faust.
Yes. Okay, regarding items F through double D, I will have Mr. Smith just continuously read those as first readings, one after the other, instead of prompting him to do so, just to save a little bit of time. During the caucus, it was Mr. Leon's suggestion, and the council agreed to form a committee that would consist of 3 members of council, and all 3 of the following individuals have agreed to serve. Mr. Leon, Mr. Horton, and Mrs. Lull to interface with the administration to discuss the future as to how, if at all, the police pay plan, would be altered in any particular way. I think I can speak for all members of council to say it's quite disappointing to see so many personnel actions to change that plan so quickly into the first year that the plan has been eliminated. So you three are welcome to meet as soon as possible and select somebody to sort of be the chair to help run the meetings and then meet with the administration as soon as you can. So with that, Mr. Smith, items F through double D, please. All first readings.
A first reading of ordinance number 48, 2018, 19th, 2018 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $4,696 for upgrade of administrative officer to office manager in pay plan. A first reading of ordinance number 49, 2018, second 2018 public safety fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $1,034 for upgrade of administrative assistant secretary in non-bargaining pay plan. A first reading of ordinance number 50, 2018, 20th 2018 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $1,034 for change in non-bargaining pay plan. A first reading of ordinance number 51, 2018, 21st 2018 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $4,460 for upgrade in non-bargaining pay plan of fiscal technician to auditor. A first reading of ordinance number 52, 2018, fifth 2018 Public Health Fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $4,688 for position change in non-bargaining pay plan, executive secretary to administrative officer 2. A first reading of ordinance number 53, 2018, 22nd 2018 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $4,688 for change in non-bargaining pay plan. A first reading of ordinance number 54, 2018, 23rd 2018 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $1,096 for change in non-bargaining pay plan system operator position. A first reading of ordinance number 55, 2018, 24th 2018 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $11,911 for change in non-bargaining pay plan, court administrative officer 2. A first reading of ordinance number 56, 2018, first 2018 Domestic Relations Fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $1,175 for change in non-bargaining pay plan, deputy director. A first reading of ordinance number 57, 2018, 25th 2018 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $400 for change in non-bargaining pay plan, deputy director. A first reading of ordinance number 58, 2018, second 2018 Domestic Relations Fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $3,518 for change in non-bargaining pay plan, senior officer positions. A first reading of ordinance number 59, 2018, 26, 2018 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $1,196 for change in non-bargaining pay plan, 5 senior officer positions. A first reading of ordinance number 60, 2018, third 2018 Domestic Relations Fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $3,890 for change in non-bargaining pay plan, supervisors. A first reading of ordinance number 61, 2018, 27th, 2018 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $1,323 for change in non-bargaining pay plan, domestic relations supervisors. A first reading of ordinance number 62, 2018, 28th, 2018 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $2,636 for change in non-bargaining pay plan, clerk typist to administrative clerk. A first reading of ordinance number 63, 2018, 29th, 2018 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $4,777 for change in non-bargaining pay plan, IT specialist to data administrator. A first reading of ordinance number 64, 2018, 6th, 2018 library fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $1,570 for change in non-bargaining pay plan, executive secretary to administrative officer 2. A first reading of ordinance number 65, 2018, 30th, 2018 general fund budget, supplemental appropriation of $1,570 for change in non-bargaining pay plan, library secretary. A first reading of ordinance number 66, 2018, 2018 Children and Youth Services Fund Budget, revised expenditures of $2,561 for change in non-bargaining pay plan, Administrative Officer 2. A first reading of ordinance number 67, 2018, 31st, 2018 General Fund Budget, supplemental appropriation of $914 for change in non-bargaining pay plan, Supervisor.
Yes.
A first reading of ordinance number 67, 2018, 32nd, 2018 General Fund Budget, supplemental appropriation of $23,348 for change in non-bargaining pay plan, Court Solicitor. A first reading of ordinance number 69, 2018, 2018 Drug and Alcohol Abuse Fund Budget, revised expenditures of $605 for change in non-bargaining pay plan, Administrative Assistant 1. A first reading of ordinance number 70, 2018, 33rd, 2018 General Fund Budget, supplemental appropriation of $3,641 for change in non-bargaining pay plan, Public Information Officer. A first reading of ordinance number 71, 2018, 34th, 2018 General Fund Budget, supplemental appropriation of $16,030 for change in non-bargaining pay plan, Manager of Facilities and Operations to Director of Facilities and Operations. A first reading of ordinance number 72, 2018, 35th, 2018 General Fund Budget, supplemental appropriation of $765 for change in non-bargaining pay plan, Deputy Warden of Operations.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Tracy, aren't you glad you get to come to these meetings all the time now, after hearing all that? Okay, a possible adoption of resolution number 33, please, in title only, Mr. Smith.
Resolution number 33 of 2018, approving the Erie County Emergency Operations Plan.
Moved by Mr. Horton.
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Lull. Is there any discussion? Mr. Smith, roll call, please.
On Resolution 33, Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Lull,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
yes,
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes. Possible adoption of resolution number 34, please, in title only.
Resolution number 34 of 2018, exonerating all outstanding taxes, penalties, interest, and fees on parcel number 15-020-015.0-119.00, 15-020-015.0, 121.00 and 15-020-015.0-122.00.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Horton and seconded by Mrs. Fatika. Is there any discussion? Mr. Smith, roll call, please.
On Resolution 34, Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Lahl,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes. Possible adoption of resolution number 35, please, in title only.
Resolution number 35 of 2018 in support of a statewide reduction of retail single-use plastic products.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Lahl,
Second.
seconded by Mrs. Fatika. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Anderson?
I just want to commend Councilwoman Lowell for the work that she's done on this particular ordinance, and I'm happy to support it.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Rastetter?
I'd also like to compliment Mrs. Lahl on this and say, good job. Why haven't we done this sooner? Why can't we just do this for the county if we can't get it through the state? Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Horton?
I appreciate the hard work that Mrs. Law put in this, and I'll first just say I'm going to support this, but it was kind of tough for me to come to that just based on our geographical area and our geographical needs and our place in the plastics industry. I do, however, always side on leaving the environment a better place for our children and generations to come afterwards. But I'm acutely aware of the cracker plant and the work that Penn State Barron does in plastics, as well as many of our advanced manufacturers. That's
Okay, Mr. Smith, roll call, please.
On Resolution 35, Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Lahl,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
yes.
Dr. Faust,
Yes. Possible appointment of Gregory S. Hayes to the Erie Regional Airport Authority.
Okay.
Mr.
Regarding
Chairman.
that appointment, Mrs. Fatika.
Yes, as a liaison to the Airport Authority, I view Mr. Hayes the same as any other local businessman who serves on the authority. It's just that his business is the training the much-needed pilots for the larger planes, which will only benefit our airport. Other businessmen have recuse themselves, as I'm sure Mr. Hayes will do when the need would arise. So I do support the appointment of Mr. Hayes.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Rastetter.
to address Mr. Talarico's concerns, I think the reason that this is all set up to make appointments is because the elected people from their district have the best knowledge of the people in their district. And that's why Mr. Hayes was my first choice, because of his knowledge and work at the airport. And I don't have any doubt that he'll do the best job possible. I don't have any reason to suspect, and I don't know if you have any real reason to assume that he may do something bad for the airport or stick his fingers in the till or whatever it is you think, he might do. Of course, he's going to vote or abstain to vote from anything that would directly impact his business. I've already talked to him about that. He was well aware that he would have to recuse and abstain from voting, and I have no doubt that he will do that. And I've tried to find other people. I understand your concerns, and that was my concerns at first, but it just comes down to he's the best man for the job. And I think we should put it to a vote. If you want to put it to a vote on tabling it, fine. If you want to put it to a vote on appointing him, do it. Let's do it.
Mr. Horton?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I like the fact that we get to recommend to the county executive appointments. And I do know Mr. Hayes. He's a fine gentleman, one of the finest I know. With that said, though, it's kind of hard for me to go against legal representation of our solicitor, and I'm comfortable either way to a degree, because if he or any individual, I hate to even just single out a one, but if one belongs to an authority in the capacity that seemingly is here, then I can't imagine a scenario where a huge amount of decisions or votes would have to be abstained upon. And then you say he's willing to abstain, but at the same time, is that really giving us the representation that we need on such an important authority? I have no problem supporting it on that level, but if he, it's not just enough to recuse yourself at the vote. Recusal means that you shouldn't have any part or partake in any discussion or influential conversation surrounding an issue. And so I really hoped that this would be tabled and allow the solicitor or those who may have questions to delve into them further. But if it goes forward tonight, I won't be able to support it just based on the solicitor's recommendation alone.
Well, just to review a couple things, we don't have a motion on the floor yet, so we can't take any action.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Leon?
as I indicated previously, I do have my concerns, but also I do have my ideals, and I believe that any member of this council who's elected to that office has the opportunity to appoint anyone they want. And if this isn't Mr. Rastetter's appointment, I have no intention of saying no. I do intend to vote yes for his appointment, regardless of what our fears may be. We were all elected to this office. We feel that whoever we appoint will do the best job possible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Mrs. Lowell?
Mr. Chairman,
Hey, Mrs. Lowell's first, and you can go.
maybe he wants to go, because I was going to put it on the table.
Mr. Anderson, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I intend to support this appointment. I don't know Mr. Hayes at all. I do know that he's a respected businessman in our community, stepping up to serve our community. I think if there was other concerns about him, his name has been put forward for several weeks. As I expressed to you and others, it could have been brought forward in another way, as not to embarrass him in the community. And I think there's no reason for him to be embarrassed in the community. I do believe it's the councilman's or councilwoman's choice in their district to put forward the person that they feel will fairly and use their judgment to be the best for that particular appointment. And so I will be supporting this appointment tonight.
Mrs. Lowell?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make the motion to appoint Gregory Hayes to the Erie Regional Airport Authority.
Second.
would
Moved
second.
by Mrs. Lowell and seconded by Mrs. Fatika. Is there any discussion? Well, I have a little bit to say. One, every member of council has the right to put forth an appointment. And every member of council thereafter has the right to decide, as their conscience dictates, whether they vote up or down on that particular appointment. Regarding this particular appointment, I take umbrage to the words that I'm embarrassing Mr. Rastatter. I pulled him aside in the hallway before we came to finance to discuss this particular appointment. Nobody asked me if I did that. Some just assumed that didn't happen, and that's unfortunate. But that's another example where this, to me, this council is headed as a group and how we work together, and that's unfortunate. I have concerns about somebody whose livelihood is so directly connected to the authority that they're going to sit on. I think that's a valid concern. When members of this council has talked about how much money he has connected to the authority itself, that's a concern to me. It may not be to others, but it is to me. And that's going to dictate, and that it has a huge impact on how I'm going to vote on this particular appointee. I don't know Mr. Hayes from Adam, as I said in the back. If he knocked me over on the street, I wouldn't know who he was. I hope and I suspect he would abstain from the votes that he is supposed to. But what my concern is that his livelihood is so intertwined with the authority that will he have to abstain over and over and over again, really, to make his appointment just that much less effective? And that's where Tom was indicating maybe we can investigate that a little bit more. It's council's will right now anyway to put the motion on the floor to vote, so we can go ahead with that. But to say that any member's appointment just needs to be automatically approved because that member brought it forward is not accurate. With all due respect to Mr. Leone, I know oftentimes we go ahead and approve with very little discussion on that. But every member has the right to vote on each individual appointment as they so choose. I did that earlier this year with some other appointments because I had disagreements with those particular appointments, and I will do so on this one respectfully, as I said in the back to Mr. Rastatter, and I will do so in the future. So with that, I will call for the vote. Mr. Smith.
Mr. Chairman, please.
Mr. Rastatter.
I just want to say, if you look at his bio, it really shows his dedication, not only to his business, but to the airport and the community as a whole. And I'll leave it at that. Go ahead and take the
Mr. Horton.
vote.
Yes, no, I just indicated that I would vote no on this. I do agree with everything that Dr. Faust has echoed. It's nothing against the individual. I just think that it may be if you're going to wound up recusing yourself for a large part of it, it might make it a moot point. Having said that, if this issue is going to be adopted anyway, I have no desire to cast any doubt and I'm not suggesting that anyone has. But Mr. Hayes is a respectable guy. In fact, he's someone that I know really, really well. And I don't want my vote to lead to any negative suspicion or connotation or whatever to a really, really fine businessman. If he has to recuse himself, if every vote has to be scrutinized, then so be it. But I think my colleagues have made compelling enough arguments, at least to me, that I will support Mr. Ratstetter's appointment.
Mr. Smith, roll call, please.
On the appointment of Greg Hayes, Mrs. Lahl,
Yes.
Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Dr. Faust,
No. If I could, with one motion, approve the sale of parcels of unsold properties.
Mr. Chairman,
Just a second, Mr. Leon, I'm sorry, don't mean to cut you off. For all the index numbers listed in our agenda from items JJ through MM. Mr. Leon.
that's what I was going to suggest, Mr. Chairman, to do them all at one time. I'll make that particular motion with all of the index numbers that are listed.
Thank you. Moved by Mr.
Second.
Leon, seconded by Mr. Horton. Is there any discussion? Mr. Smith, roll call, please.
on the sale of parcels, Mr. Rastetter,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Fatika,
Yes.
Mr. Horton,
Yes.
Mr. Leone,
Yes.
Mrs. Law,
Yes.
Dr. Faust.
Yes.
Move to adjourn.
Council stands adjourned. Thank you, everyone.